I'm Ben Ryman, and this is Behavior Speak. Camille Proctor is a dynamic force for change in the realms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. As the founder and executive director of the Color of Autism Foundation, Camille's journey began with her son's autism diagnosis, igniting a passion for creating equitable outcomes for all autistic children. Join me in my conversation with Camille. Hey, welcome to the podcast, Camille.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that I'm producing this podcast from the still lands of the Clays, Komoko, Comox, and Kla'amin First Nations. Grateful to be here. All right, so Camille, tell me a little bit about yourself.
So, my name is Camille Proctor, and I'm the executive director of the Color of Autism Foundation, which I founded in 2009, 2 years after my son was diagnosed with autism. It was founded so that people of color could have culturally competent supports.
Right on. And maybe we could start with a little bit. I know you've told this story quite a few times, and had the opportunity to listen to a few podcasts and watch a few videos beforehand. So I've also heard this story a few times. But just to give some background, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your sort of experience discovering your lad had autism, and kind of why you decided to start an organization. I don't see a lot of parents that with a kid at the age of 2 getting an autism diagnosis going into and starting an organization. Usually they're very kind of focused on their own thing and trying to figure.
Yeah, I was focused on my own thing. That's what the problem was. I didn't have anyone that understood some of the unique stuff that I went through. So, understanding that Black children are perceived as being older than they are just because, or they were always perceived as the mischievous one or the person that's going to cause the trouble or the troublemaker. And so my big concern was about what's going to happen to my son who was then 2, what was going to happen when he was like 12 and someone perceived him to be an adult when he was a 12-year-old. If he didn't have any words, right, and he was approached by the police, or even if he was approached by a citizen who just perceived him to be a threat, what was going to happen to him? And so I would go to support groups and ask these types of questions, and I would really make people feel uncomfortable because, and those people would be white people because I'd be the only person of color there. So that was the problem number one. And through these different ordeals that I had or experiences, I realized that I was like, I felt alone and I felt isolated, and I really didn't get the support that I needed. And then in my own community, there was, there was this staunch denial of, of the existence of autism because people thought it only happened to white boys. So there were a lot of things that kind of led me to this path, but those were the 2 main things: is feeling isolated outside of my community and even within my community. I tell a story about when my son was young. He wasn't like 2 or anything. He was a little bit older, like maybe 5 or 6. No, it would go to New Orleans and I would go into this restaurant and this lady's talking to him and he's not saying anything back. And I told her, I said, "Oh, he's autistic." And it brought my only laughing because she grabbed his head and she started, "Ooh, shaka, laka, 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 laka." And she had his head going back and forth. We were dying laughing, like I was dying laughing because she had clue, and so just those types of experiences, makes me, those are real things, those are things. And so I just wanted to make sure that families were supported. And then also, too, that when I looked at the numbers, Black children were getting diagnosed 4 to 5 years later than their white counterparts. So you have Black children being diagnosed between the ages, on average, of 5 or more. And that was to me, that was like a huge disparity. Because people were dismissing the behavior as being something that it wasn't. So, for example, oftentimes they get oppositional defiant. They would never get autistic. And when you don't get the right diagnosis, you don't get the right help.
So did you get the right diagnosis right away, or what was your experience?
For me, I didn't get. So what happened with me is that my son didn't have what they thought were the traits of an autistic person. So he made eye contact. They didn't realize he only made eye contact with women. He liked being touched. That's known as a sensory seeker now. So there were some things that he did that made them say that he was just delayed.
Yeah.
Developmentally delayed. I got that a lot, but I just kept going from doctor to doctor until I found one who said he had 47 instead of 46 chromosomes, which was over, that she considered a gray area, but in her mind as a doctor, the gray area were typically autistic people. That's what she told me. She said that's usually the autistic person. She's like, it's nothing bad. It's just a gray area. But she was able to get me from her office to the very next day into a developmental pediatrician who was able to confirm my son was autistic.
So really, the only reason you got through quicker was because of a genetic test that found something different. Whereas I think a lot of parents, because autism isn't necessarily associated with extra chromosomes or extra genes and that kind of thing. It's a thing for sure where folks will have deletions or additions or whatever and have these syndromes and maybe have autistic traits. But
you're talking out of my pay grade. But
yeah.
Out of my pay grade.
Yeah.
She said it was a gray area.
Right.
That it doesn't mean Fragile X. It doesn't mean this. She straight up called it a gray area.
Yeah. All I'm getting at is that a lot of folks don't have the luxury of getting some sort of blood test result that leads them towards an autism diagnosis.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But it was like I wasn't going to stop, And so for me, it was a lot of things that happened. Like, I had to stop working. And I basically took everything I had to figure out what's going on with this kid. Okay, so once I found out what I suspected, I didn't feel better. So that's the thing. I found out, okay, so he is autistic. Okay, should have been great. But it really wasn't. And the reason it really wasn't great was because I didn't have the supports that I needed, right? So, yippee, diagnosis. Don't have the support. And that was a problem, right? That was a problem. When you don't have what you need to be and feel supported, it's hard. And not having the right navigation to services, meaning what's a real service, what's not a real service, right? Those are the types of things that people need. Yeah. Because, I always say, no, my friend has this saying about people in the autism world. I can't remember what it is, but basically saints and sinners, kind of like you got pariahs, and then you got, the people that really want to help.
Yeah.
And it's hard. You have to have a lot of discernment. And it's hard for parents to have that kind of discernment, to know, you know what I mean? Like, who's really going to take care of them? Take care of their loved one.
So what do you think? What do you think was it for you? Like, what made you such a staunch advocate? Because you didn't have that support system initially. What kind of gave you the drive to kind of, keep pushing for the diagnosis, keep pushing to figure out what's going on, without having those supports? Or was it a result of creating the foundation that eventually you got more supports?
No, I didn't actually get more supports. I mean, that supports were what they were. I lived in
If you'd like to earn 1 continuing education hour for this episode as a behavior analyst, you'll need to listen for the 3 secret words and submit them to our link in the show notes. The first secret word is parent.
At the time I lived in Georgia, and it was what it was. You either had money to pay for the stuff or you didn't. And I did until I didn't, if that makes sense. It's like I had the money. I did until I did not.
Yeah.
And that's a real thing because, I was paying out of pocket for all of these services, and it's a thing. Like I did until I didn't, and when I didn't, I didn't have any more money, and it was like, oh, this is a wrap, folks. Yeah.
And so and again, I'm less familiar with kind of the American system and everything. Being in Canada, what did you have insurance or anything like that? Because I know
so years ago, when my son was little, insurance didn't cover it.
Right.
They didn't cover a lot. So they covered speech therapy. They would cover OT. Or no, it was some things they just didn't cover. And so let me step back. There's back then there were so many different types of therapies that everyone swore were I'm making this up, spaghetti therapy. Okay, let's try it. I mean, whatever it was, I was trying to try it. And that's one of the things that I think could be better defined, or is now more better defined. But back then, I think the only thing you could get was speech and occupational therapy. And so I took, I think, one of Stanley Greenspan's last floor time.
Right.
Yep, I learned floor time. I mean, I was a mess. I don't even know how I didn't really retain any of that stuff, but technically, I know how to do floor time. Right?
Yeah.
And I took it, and so now things have changed. I mean, in the States, they do have coverage for things like applied behavioral analysis, and parents can utilize that system as well as occupational and speech. Usually speech and occupational is provided in the school systems, but I always help parents to take it outside of school because you can do both here in the States.
All right, so tell me more about the foundation. So what were the beginnings like of the foundation? What were the early days like?
Oh, God, the early days were pretty rough because literally I was going around trying to convince people that this was a thing. It wasn't a thing for just white kids. So that was the problem. It was just trying to fundraise, trying to get people engaged, I had more people that needed help than more people that would help the foundation. But even with the people that needed help, they didn't want to do some of the things they needed to do in order for their kids to be successful. Because they didn't understand what would be the benefit of it, right? So that was challenging for me. And it felt kind of hurt, and I felt even more isolated. So here I started an organization to help people, and then no one wants to help me, and no one believes that these people need help. Right?
Right.
No, that's just the man saying, oh, they're just trying to label these kids. There's nothing wrong with these kids. And it's funny, the same people that said these things to me years ago, their children have gotten into trouble, or their children are now, you know what I mean? So, and now they're like, oh yeah, it was really a thing. Really? Because we talked about that.
So just like, so the other parents were kind of a lot like the professionals you were kind of engaging in early on, in that they they didn't even believe,
right?
He was autistic, and that was a thing for you folks.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's hard. Like I used to have this joke that I never met one Black parent that didn't have a high functioning autistic kid. And I go, what qualifies him as high functioning? Oh, he talks. And I'm like, but so that's what you qualify? A high functioning person is a person that knows how to talk, but that flapping and that rocking is anxiety. Perhaps, it's not always. Sometimes it's self-soothing. Sometimes it's something that makes them feel good. Sometimes it makes whatever. But most people don't do that.
Right.
I'm not making fun of that behavior. Most people don't do that.
Yeah.
Because I always encourage, like, for example, for my son, if he stems, I don't care. As long as he's not harming himself, I don't care. have at it. But there's good stems and there's bad stems. So, but that's me kind of jumping ahead. But yeah, I had a lot of parents that were just like in denial. And I had the parents who weren't in denial, but they were so beat down by the system and they were so tired that they couldn't even follow through on some of the steps that I would give them. Give you an example. There's an autism clinic that would do free diagnostics and free care for children with special needs. I said autism clinic, but it was really for just kids with special needs. But it had a long wait list. So I would tell parents, this is what you do. Call once a week or periodically. If you can't do it once a week, remember, make a note for yourself to call. Oh, that's too much trouble. Well, if you call all the time, when they get that cancellation, they can put you in. Out of 25 parents, I can tell you that maybe 2 did that and worked for them. So it's just one of those things of like, you want to have a voice, but then your voice is muted.
Right. And was the foundation initially sort of just something in your own community?
So I always wanted it to be national because I noticed that there wasn't anything really for people that look like me. But initially it was, when you start foundations, oftentimes they do kind of, if you want to get funding, I didn't get any funding. So maybe that's what they want. They go, well, where are you located? But eventually it spread nationally because I realized there was nothing. There's really nothing for people nationally. And and the funny thing is, I remember when I started my organization, there was another family that lived in Denver and they had an organization. And I think that as time went on, everybody dissipated except for me.
Right.
Because I just, for me, I couldn't give up. And I know there's still some people around, but when I say they weren't able to sustain. And so there's a difference from having a nonprofit and having a foundation to sustaining it.
So clearly you did. I mean, you started in 2009. We're at 24 now. So that's, help me with some math here. That's what, 16, 17 years?
Yeah.
And that means your son must be around that same age too now, what, 18, 19?
He's 18. He's 18.
Yeah.
18. Yeah. And April, I forgot. It's like time's flying. Like I was supposed to submit something the other day and I forgot it was June. I'm like, wait, it's June? Wait, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't able to, but there's a lot of things that people don't tell you. And I had to learn along the way. And so I always tell people I bumped my head a lot because I didn't know. I didn't know that you can't just go to grant funders and say, hey, give me money. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
What is the money for? Well, I want to do this for people. And they tell you stuff like, well, you're just giving them stuff. That's not a program. You learn all these things, but it was a lot of head bumping. Like I said, along the way, I learned what would help me do the work that I wanted to do. And so a lot of no's helped me with what my organization is now. People saying no.
So what does the organization do? What does the Color of Autism Foundation do today?
Sure. So what we do today is that we focus on building efficacy within these families. And what is that? What is efficacy? Well, being able to understand and meet the needs of your loved ones, so that you as a family unit have a productive and successful life. And that's what that's all about. We want parents and caregivers to take a good look at some of the behaviors. They'll say he never sleeps. What happens before he never sleeps? every day at 12 o'clock, he's hitting his head up against the wall. What happens before he starts hitting his head up against the wall, or she does this? So we teach parents how to collect data on their children so they could better meet, again, the needs. Like, let's figure out why they're doing this. What's making them feel uncomfortable? Is it anxiety? Could it be a stomach ache? Because a lot of people on the spectrum have gastrointestinal issues. So we want parents to be more receptive to their children's needs. This is important because oftentimes we as parents, or at least for me, I was really more concerned about the behaviors that were inconvenient to me. But that didn't really help my son.
Gotcha.
I just wanted him to stop doing whatever it was that got on my nerves. And I was very selfish. And I think a lot of parents, no parent will really admit that, but I just want him to stop.
Yeah.
Because, the bird noises, the flapping, all that stuff was a lot in my mind. But when I learned how to tune it out and I realized that was his self-expression, I'm able to tune it out. Sometimes, unless he's right next to me on purpose to drive me insane, because he has a sense of humor.
And did you find that the programs that you were, putting your son in, whether or the sort of the services that you're getting your son to access, were focusing on the things that were annoying you, or were they focusing on the things that he needed for the rest of his life?
So that's the problem with services. This whole world of autism is fairly new. And what I say by that is that, like, so for example, ABA, which originated as I like to call the gateway to torture, which is not, but that's what a lot of people see it as.
Yep.
And I think that the protocols have changed, and those who are staunchly against it, a lot of people don't understand that everything we do in life is pretty much is structured in ABA. We tie our shoes, we wash dishes, so everything we do is task based. I'm not trying to minimize ABA, but everything we do is pretty much task based.
Sure.
But I will say that the therapeutics that he had early on, they didn't really address what he needed. And I think that's because they were just so new. And then you're taking a conversion model and you're trying to modify it into a new decade. And I think that was one of the ways that ABA suffered, because you're taking these discrete trials and all of these other things that aren't as applicable to today's world, if I'm making any sense. And so it didn't really help him because it was robotic. It wasn't free flowing conversation.
Right.
He was just making up phrases like, how perfect example, and he still does it. Comes in, how was school today? And I go, no, I ask you that. And so then he goes, well, go ahead. And then he goes, go ahead. I go, well, how was school? Great. So he's a whole conversation starter. And I think that's one of the, drawbacks. I think that one of the other problems, at least here in the States, is that the practitioners are really mostly all young. So when you have someone that's older or should be aging out of the system, and when I say older, because I think, again, we have a system here in the States where children of color are getting diagnosed later.
Right.
But there's no one to actually provide the right and proper therapeutics for them, because they only know how to work with little kids.
Yes.
So, for example, as my son got older, the clinic that he was going to, I think I made someone mad, and I said, listen, you don't have enough tread on your tire or wisdom to move beyond a toddler. And they looked at me and I said, or a 6-year-old. I said, he needs life skills, and you don't have any programs for that because you're under 30. So no matter what they told you when you were doing your internship wherever, working, you know what I mean? Like you're not.
So the point that basically because all of the professionals are, and it's true. I think I read a stat the other day that I think 80% of behavior analysts in the field were hired in the last 5 years, or became certified, in the last 5 years, which means, coming just out of college and getting certified. And so essentially you've got a bunch of 20-somethings that are providing service to most of the kids on the planet. And so your point here is that these folks themselves haven't had life experience to kind of know what skills, what, traits, knowledge they need to have to sort of live to 70, 80.
I mean, like, what are you going to tell a hormonal teen?
Right.
You're like 4'11", you're female. My son's 6'2".
Mm-hmm.
That's hard because you don't have enough, like I said, life experience. Now there's some badasses that are low to the ground, but if you don't have that experience, you can't be taken serious.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. I think that most people on the spectrum, they want to feel safe. That's first and foremost. And they don't understand that the way that you communicate with them is part of their safety net.
Mm-hmm.
And someone said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, there's a lot of confidence." To give you an example, you have on a fire hat right now, right?
Yep.
So in case of a fire, would you run to the dude with the red hat and the hose, or would you run to the dude with the hat that cap on?
Right.
Who would you run to? The person that's basically saying who they are and why they're there. And I think that's one of the issues, is that you have to be able to define who you are, what you're there to do, and that's how you get respect from anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're like, I had an issue with my son where everything that was asked of him, it was a suggestion. And I had it in his class, "Would you like to sit down?" Nope. "Would you like to?" Nope. And so there lied the problem. He was not complying to anything because he kept always getting it. He was always asked a question. And it's like, okay, that's not going to work either. So, I mean, it is what it is. I mean,
So did your son have then ABA services like up until 18 or up until 7, or like how did that work? Did he?
so he can see, he can still have it. I mean, he still has it. And the reason he still has it is because just like a lot of people, so here in the States we have waivers and all this kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
So once it's gone, it's gone. So if you let go of that particular therapy, then you are off the list, or you did it. And this is the problem. They don't have they don't have the type of transitional services they should have region or state by state for older people.
Right.
So effectively, what we worked on with him is just communication skills, life skills, like how to do things, situational scenarios and stuff that apply to him.
Something else you mentioned earlier was that, and this was kind of some of the stigma around autism in the Black community, and the idea that there's this belief that autism is something white boys get, essentially. And that makes sense. I mean, that's what a lot of the stats are about, and that's what most of the research points out. And, not that that's true, but that's the information that's put out.
Kind of failed in that area because they haven't really. I mean, they fail young women.
Yep.
And they fail minorities.
100%. Yeah, and I've had bunch of guests on in the past where we've really dug into that. And, essentially most of the research in any of these kind of, mental health professional lands it tends to focus on what kind of positive outcomes they can get for white folks. And most of the research that sort of determines the problems tends to focus on the non-white folks. So Black folks are the ones that are the subjects in the studies when we're trying to come up with diagnoses and labels, but white folks are the ones that are in the studies when we want to actually help them out. So that's not surprising. So there's a stigma around just autism even existing in the Black community. I imagine there's also a lot of concerns around the fact that most of the services that are provided in the autism community are provided by white folks. There's probably not a lot of Black folks providing services. I know in the ABA world, I think the second secret word is voice. I think the recent number was just a little over 5% of folks in ABA are identified as Black. Whereas the amount of kids that are autistic, are something like a much higher rate. So it's really hard for families to get Black families to get Black therapists to work with their kids.
Well, it's expensive. So it's a couple things going on.
Yeah.
So, evidence-based practices are evidence on white kids. That's true.
Yeah.
So when you start talking about evidence-based therapies, again, we got more of the same.
Yeah.
The problem is that it is expensive. College is expensive. So obtaining the right skills, obtaining the right licensing in order to be a behaviorist is hard. Mm-hmm. And so if you would come from a community that doesn't have the means to support you, or you come from a household that doesn't have the means to support you, like here in the States, BCBA has to work for free for a year.
Right.
A lot of families of color they can't afford for someone to work free for a year, But you know what? I don't want to limit it to just a lot of people can't afford that, period. But that's just one of the stipulations.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard. College is expensive for everyone nowadays. And so that's one of the things. And then also, too, the communities have to get more acquainted with what the needs are. Like, again, realizing that autism is a thing. It's not limited to one minority or ethnicity. Everyone gets it. It doesn't discriminate. It's not a discriminatory condition, It likes everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, autism is quite equitable.
Yeah, very equitable. It likes everybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't exclude. So, and so once you get past that, then you start getting people who say, I want to make a difference in my community. And I want to be a therapist, and I want to be the type of therapist that are going to address some of the systemic issues that the people in my community face. And so they're coming along. It's just not a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about sort of getting involved in the community and hearing more from the community, and that we kind of need more research in the area. And that kind of leads to why I kind of reached out to having you on the podcast in the first place. Was I had Dr. Brian Boyd on the podcast about a month or so ago, and folks will know Dr. Boyd. Actually, a lot of folks will know about Dr. Boyd today now because he was recently elected as the president of the International Association.
Sorry, I was there. Yeah.
Yeah, for autism research, which is super awesome. But he also, prior to that, he was a director of the Juniper Garden Center, and he's been involved in a lot of really kind of cool kind of community-based research projects when it comes to autism and the like. And I had found him through a study that he did with a couple colleagues and yourself called a culturally grounded autism parent training program with Black parents. And I asked him a little bit about that study, and he said, "Well, I can't really tell you. That's something Camille needs to tell you." I said, "All right, well, then I'm going to go find her and get her on the podcast." So maybe you could tell me, maybe we could talk a little bit about that work and some of the work that you're doing with Dr. Boyd. I know you've got another study in progress as well. So tell me a little bit about the study, but also I'd like to know a lot about more about this autism parent training program that you have with the Color of Autism.
So, our parent training, we have 5-week facilitated trainings with parents, and we introduce them to facilitators that look like them. So, members of the Black community who are speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, and ABA or behaviorists. And the goal is so that these parents ask the right questions as opposed to the wrong questions. The goal is to get the parents from folded arms to unfolded arms, cameras off to cameras on, where they're asking the things they need to ask. Because we explain to them, you're not always going to get a practitioner that looks like you. But you need to understand what it is, what the therapy is. What does it do? How can you be a better partner? What is it supposed to do? So, like, for instance, if they're doing something wrong, you need to be able to identify that correctly so you can say what your problem is with the way that they're delivering that service to you. And what we did was during the pandemic, we went online and we started, we were doing the therapy. And what we did is we started to collect data on it to see, okay, how much of what we taught you can we replicate. So this is funny. There's two things that are funny. So the way that particular model was a little bit different. We would introduce them to Black trainers, but we'd also try to teach them, tips and tricks and all of that stuff. And so we got the data back and it was favorable, But I have to say that the data that we collected for that study, what we do today is a little bit different. Because what I realize is that parents are so overwhelmed that they don't have time to do a bridge version of parent training of therapeutic training in their home. So we cut it short. We're like, now we just want you to take a look at the behaviors and we want you to note that so that you can be more responsible to their needs. And we still do. This is what this is. But basically, we're introducing them to people and they're talking about what they do as an occupation, not what we want you to do at home with your kids. Because we realized that for that overwhelmed parent, they're not going to retain any of this. They just know they're sad. And so the training now that we have, we are able, after we get them through that first 5 weeks, we move them on to a more intense training where it is task-based, teaching them positive discipline for their child on the spectrum. So that's a little more task-based. But the introduction to it, we give them something lighthearted. Not lighthearted, but just light. We want them to know that they're not the only person on the face of the earth that has an autistic kid. We want them to know there's a village out here for them that will support them, so on and so forth. So that's really what we try to work on, is stabilizing a lot of these parents who are a little wobbly. They like to table, you need to put a piece of paper underneath the leg, just a little wobbly. But once we give them a little bit of levity, they tend to do better.
So I remember I was listening to a podcast you did back in 2020 with some other behavior analysts, the Shades of ABA podcast with Dr. Antonio. And I remember you talked about sort of the importance of you really insisted that folks do the entire 5-week training and that they don't do it in
the 5-week training.
Yeah.
I mean, if they don't have to, we can't make you do anything.
Yeah. But
you get a certificate of completion. We don't tell you what the topics are going to be because we want you to sit there. Now, why? Because it's like someone closing you in a room, but it's really not. When the parents stay, whether they have a 2-year-old or they have a 20-year-old, they learn something. Because the reason we make them do that is because we want them to we're building a community of strong advocates. We don't want them to just come. We want them to come, create a fellowship, create bonds, And we really want to serve as the connecting thread to parents, to other parents, as well as services. And we want them to build their own networks.
So this is a capacity building thing. You really want these folks to kind of carry this on, and then when they see a mom down on the street that's struggling, they can be a resource and so on.
Yeah, they can say, you know what, I was there, but I learned that you can do this. That's really important, because you don't know how many parents don't know what they don't know. I was one of them. A really good friend of mine helped me out, because when my son was going into preschool and they wanted to put him in a specialized class, I did not want him in that specialized class because somehow in my mind he was special. I didn't want him doing the things that those kids in that class did, because if he would be around them, he would start to do. That was my mindset, because I didn't understand what came with that specialized class. And what came with that specialized class was the fact that instead of having 20 kids, it only had 4 or 5. Instead of having a teacher and 1 paraprofessional, it had 1 teacher and 3 paraprofessionals, which was almost one-on-one. Instead of having a general curriculum, it was a curriculum that was geared more towards him. It took a friend of mine to explain that to me, because she has an autistic adult child now, but at the time he was younger, she had to explain it to me. She said, what on earth are you talking about? And I'm like, well, if he's with all those kids, he needed to be mainstream. He needed to be this in my mind. And I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong. Do I think inclusion is important? It sure is. But there's some kids who inclusion at that large of a scale doesn't work. And when you start talking about the public school system, it doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, inclusion is a lofty term that we like waving around, but inclusion doesn't just mean putting a kid in the room with a bunch of other kids. I mean, that's integration, or whatever term you want to call it, but they're not actually included. They're just there.
Right. And it's just to make the parents feel better. Yeah. And I don't need to feel better. Yeah. My son needs to feel empowered. See?
Yeah. And again, I think it's really, I mean, this, you could really tangent on this one for sure, but I think the idea of, spending so much effort on trying to get a kid included in the classroom, you're wasting valuable time to give them skills for when they're out of that school, because they're not going to be in a school all their life, and so, right. So what's really important is these tasks and these skills that they have, so that when they get out of school, they can survive in the world, not so much belong in a classroom.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you've got, I look on the website, you've got a few programs. You've got the culturally responsive parent training, and so is that essentially this 5-week course?
Yeah, it's our 5-week course that we run quarterly. Next one starts June 15th. Then we have a dad support group, because that's really a thing. And then we have a general support group that's a little more structured. It's a little more facilitated. Our dad's group, I don't think is structured. I don't know, because I'm not a dad. I've never, but, and I always say, well, I don't know what they talk about, but they talk about something, because they have about 20 regulars that'll pop up in any given time.
Yeah.
So, we and we're focusing on a lot of stuff right now. We realize that there's a disparity with autistic people and their employment. People not giving them the accommodations that they deserve. We do childcare training, so we are taking these providers and training them on how to be more responsive to the child that might be on the spectrum, instead of putting them out because he bit somebody or slapped somebody, or whatever the case may be, because sometimes behaviors are what they are. Doesn't mean a kid that slaps and bites is autistic, but what was happening by the numbers is that if a kid cried or he did something, that a behavior that they seem to be deemed disruptive, that they would put them out. And then what does that parent do who's trying to earn a living if they don't have anyone to watch their child?
Yeah.
It's like a cycle of poverty. And a lot of times people don't talk about how difficult it is for parents to take care of their families when they have a loved one that might be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's gotta be. I can't imagine. It's gotta be crazy tough.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got these two support groups, and you got the training group. Is all this stuff virtual? Like, are you or are there?
It's all virtual. Right now, it's all virtual because we're able to meet more people.
Yeah,
where they are.
Yeah,
and that way they can be logged on. We don't care if their kids are getting in a shot. We don't care if somebody's crying. Just mute button. As long as you can still hear us, we don't care.
Yeah. And how many folks might you see in one of these groups on any given time? I know you said the fathers group's got about 20 regulars. What are the other ones?
Well, so in the parent training, we've trained so far about 700 families in 4 years.
Wow.
So we started off with an echo in our little rooms. Like it would show up, it'd be like 20 people show up, and then by the next week, it'd be 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. But our past classes have run between 30 to 50 people. I mean, for the past 2 years, 30 to 50 people.
And is it you putting these classes on, or do you have other folks doing it?
I'm usually there, but we have different facilitators. I'm usually there every week, but we have a different facilitator every week to talk about different subject matters.
And are these facilitators parents themselves that went through the program, or
they're all, like I said, they're all practitioners of some of the therapeutics that the parents will encounter.
Gotcha. So they can go right to the source on kind of learning about those services and what's available and how to act.
Right. And they could say stuff like, well, this lady advised me to get my son a communication device. What does that mean? If I get him a device, does that mean he'll still talk, or will he not talk and only use that device? But these are the types of questions that they have.
And why wouldn't it be just enough for them to just go to those professionals themselves and ask those questions? Why do they need to come to a group and get those questions answered? What's different?
The problem when they go to professionals, like that training that they're supposed to get when at the ABA clinic, it doesn't address their bias. That doesn't address why it's important. That's just telling them, okay, so we did this with little Cindy, and we want you to do this at home with little Cindy. That's all that's telling them. It's not explaining to them why it's important. It's not explaining to them why over a lifespan your child will need to have these skills. That's not explanatory. It's not, and it's also not offering them a community. And that's basically what the difference is. And I can tell you that I have parents who have sat in on sessions, these trainings, and not our trainings, but I've had therapists say that they've had situations where they met with parents, right? And they don't have any questions. And then the parents turn around and call me and say, hey, I went to this and I don't know what they're talking about. And then I end up calling a therapist and I say, well, they didn't know what you were talking about. And they're like, they were here for 2 hours. I said, and they didn't ask me anything. I said, I know. Because they didn't feel, they didn't feel confident.
Yeah,
they didn't feel confident.
The third secret word is donate. So your son's 18 now. And so what's sort of the next step for him? And then sort of, is there plans for kind of Color of Autism to kind of start talking to adults too?
We do. I mean, we do help adults to a certain degree, but the thing is, and I realize is that we can't, as an organization, do everything. And I think that we're looking at how to really create, like we want to create support services And so we're looking at a program that we previously did where job training is a focus, but entrepreneurship is more of a focus. Because you have a lot of autistic people who have great ideals.
Yep.
So we're going to be probably next year creating an incubator where they can kind of hash out their ideals, right? Get a mentor. Like people have great ideals, but if you don't know how to make your concept a reality, so we want to do that for autistic adults, because I think that too often they were taught to do these menial tasks that aren't things anymore. Then there's a lot of great bakers out there. You know, there's a lot of great business people. There's some great techies. We don't know. But whatever it is they want to do, we want to make sure they have a voice and choice. So we want to help them get there. But for my son, he's in a program that he can be in until he's 26.
So this is a program that he's been in for a while, but they'll allow him to still keep.
No, he just gets it in February, but he can be in it until he's 26. It's a vocational program.
Right. Gotcha. Are there like culturally responsive? I know there's more culturally responsive services now for kids. I mean, there's been work on that. I mean, there's not a lot, but there's been more effort to kind of provide more culturally informed, culturally responsive, early intervention and whatnot. But it always seems like everything is lost once that kid turns 19 or becomes an adult.
It is for most places in the United States.
Yeah. And I would think that'd probably be even less so for folks that aren't white. That there'd be even sort of.
Actually, I would have to tell you that it's pretty bad for everybody, right?
It's bad across the board for adults.
It just becomes worse when you are in a community that's low resource.
And are you folks doing anything in that regards? Like I read something about, and I think we talked a bit when we talked last time about these kind of community hubs you're forming. Can you tell me about those?
So there's a nonprofit who really they have a lot of different locations. They went into communities, they bought these properties pretty cheap, and they have community hubs. And the whole idea is that a person doesn't have to walk more than 15 minutes to get to them. And so from that same concept, we're looking to go into the community and make sure that whether it be supporting them or just us being in that community, that people are able to access us a little more readily.
And with that in mind, I've heard of you because, I spend a little time on social media with the podcast, and so things kind of pop up, and I've seen some stuff on Instagram and the like, and so I'm aware. How do young Black families who have just had just starting to discover that their child might be a little different, how do they learn about you, being sort of, one of the only organizations kind of doing this in the country?
Well, again, we rely on social media and word of mouth, right? And we encourage them to reach out to us so at least that we can help them, support them to some of the things that they have to go through, or if for potential, upcoming things they would have to learn. But yeah, we ask people to go to our website, The Color of Autism, take a look at our programs page, look at what might be beneficial to them. We are not a social service organization. And what I mean by that, we don't give out cash awards or anything like that. We focus solely on education and support.
I imagine early on when you were probably starting this up, that people were probably coming to you looking for more services than you provided. I know I often see that with some of these, or with any sort of organization that provides services, that parents are often always in crisis and they just want someone to come in and kind of solve all their problems. Was that something you kind of ran into early on, or still run into?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They think that you're supposed to have these things and you need qualified people to run these things.
Yeah.
And that's the expectation I give them. You have to have qualified people to run these things. And like people say to me, oh, there's no respite. I want respite. And you have to understand, there's not enough qualified people to give you respite. And at $12 an hour, you probably won't get a good person.
Yeah.
So we do talk to the parents a lot about changing the laws.
Yeah. So there's a sort of a grassroots kind of advocacy component of the work you're doing, because I think that's a big piece, especially for these kids once they get into adulthood. I mean, I feel like black or white or whatever, we're still in like such early days when it comes to adult services. A lot of the services for kids seem to kind of come out a lot out of like lawsuits and court cases that happen to sort of, I don't.
Everything is always reactionary, and we're just a service desert. And it's not like they know we're not all dying to drink water.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a service desert, and I think they need to do more. But the problem is there needs to be more qualified people. You can't, you know what I mean? Like, there has to be qualified people. And that's the most important thing, is people who know what the heck they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case. So that's one of the things I always say we need to be really mindful of. It's easy to say what needs to be done, but we got to have the right people.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to have, 100% got to have the right people.
Yeah. And I've seen a bit of work being done there. I know there's a group in Missouri, a group of behavior analysts in Missouri, of Black behavior analysts in Missouri, that have gotten together, and they're doing work to try to create more ABA training programs in historically Black colleges and universities, and trying to sort of encourage that piece, I think, to kind of get more growth, because I think that's another big issue, is how can we build capacity in sort of these other kind of cultural groups.
Yeah, that's a real thing too. And so, it's kind of like, I want to say, it's multifaceted on like what's really needed. There's so much stuff needed. And it's not a perfect situation by any means. But people are trying.
Yeah. Another issue that kind of comes up a lot for most of my experience working in the field has been with adults and older adults, and often folks that no longer have any family, to support them. Many times because they're not living anymore, and it's hard to watch. It's hard to see, a 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old, autistic individual who's got no support system, got no one there. What kinds of things have you thought about, both for your own son, but as well, just in terms of, all these young families who are just really concerned about sort of today, right now, and, getting their kids through school and those sorts of things, where I think one of the biggest fear a lot of parents have is what's going to happen to my kid when I die.
It's a reality, and we do talk to parents about, and I try, so it's hard sometimes, and let me be, again, full disclosure. We do have, we do talk to people about, creating trust and all these different things. But the problem is that if you are from a low resource area, and I'm telling you, just put this money to the side. What money? And so I think that what needs to really be a thing is building the community you want to see. And building the community you want to see, that's not a problem. That's not, I don't want to say that's not going to be a problem, but if you say, okay, we need to create a space. We need to create a space for these individuals. We need to make sure that, there's a place for the autistic aging population. Right? That's really important. And I think that that's one of the things that I would like to see is that, and there's a number of people who are, those people are going to talk about me if they hear this podcast. I'm going to say, I don't want to say geriatric, but senior people who are autistic, and they right now are in a prime, and they're primed to be the consultants of what these supports should look like.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important that they're reached out to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So where do you kind of get most of your funding now, and how, if folks wanted to kind of help out Color of Autism, how they go about doing that?
So, they can always go to the website, to colorofautism.org/donate. We apply for grants. We get grant funding from different philanthropic organizations. So I'd say we managed to survive so that we can continue offering services at no cost to, let me be clear, to families and their caregivers and to individuals. But, it's one of those things where you kind of have to be out there, and we do a lot of we accept donations, and like I said, when we write grants, so we're always out asking for something, and our ask is usually to donate what you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just important that for us, it's always been important for me to make sure that people aren't limited by income.
Yeah.
Because I remember people who couldn't afford things. They couldn't afford anything. And so they didn't have their kids in service.
Mm.
And that's unfortunate. And I don't want to turn anyone away who needs the help, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Appreciate that. So what's sort of kind of looking at the next 5 years for Color of Autism? What's the sort of plan going forward?
Well, I really would like to, just as I stated before, I really do want to have a where we're able to help more autistic people. And I would like to continue to add more autistic people onto our staff. We have 3, but we would like to have more. And now, before 3 out of, actually, there's more autistic extroverted people than, so we don't have many employees. It's like 5 of them.
Yeah.
So 3 and 2 left. So, but a lot of people ask, and but that's who makes up most of the programming.
Mm.
And that's another reason why I think a lot of our programming has worked, is because we have gone to the autistic community and said, what do you think will work?
That's awesome.
If your parent could go back in a time machine, what do you think would be the most useful thing your parent could provide for you? So that's really important.
Yeah.
So hopefully in the next 5 years, we would have started the design of the community that we wanted to see by giving more autistic people opportunities and supporting more families of neurodivergent children. So they don't feel isolated.
Yeah.
Because like I said, when you understand what the need is, you can better parent. It's just that simple. You got to understand what the need is in order to better parent.
Yeah.
I hope I gave you some great stuff.
I appreciate
you taking the time to talk to me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on. It was great.
Not a problem. And let me know if you need anything else from me.
I will. There are 2 other interviews that I've done that complement some of today's discussion. To learn more about Camille and her collaboration with Dr. Brian Boyd, check out episode 171, Empowering Black Voices in Autism Research. And to learn more about the history of psychological research in the Black community, check out episode 98, Black Liberation Psychology, a conversation with Dr. Evan August. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please follow us on Instagram @BehaviorSpeak.